Welcome back, everybody. I'm here with Rob Davis, who has written Purpose and Form, the Necessary Basis of All Ethics. Last week, we went through Chapter 9, Metaphysics of Mind, and now we are delving into Chapter 10, Christianity and Jung, Efficacy in the World and the Cultivation of the Individual in Modern Times. How are you doing today, Rob?
Doing well. How about you?
Doing well, doing well. A little overcast today, but it's okay. What we really need is some rain. It's been quite a drought here recently, and all the foliage is turning. I guess it's typical for this time of year, I suppose, but it happened a little faster than expected. Um, yeah, so let's go in. Let's jump right in. Could you kind of give us a general overview of what you are purporting in this chapter?
Sure. So, two chapters ago, we did the Christian ethic, and then we took a little detour, you might say, into chapter 9, where we focused on just the idea of truth itself. That, in a way, that was an expansion of the previous chapter. And so, this is, in a way, our third chapter on Christianity. And the previous one was more of a common overview of some of the main most common points of Christianity. And in a way, this chapter is a more specific look at some more niche issues, you might say. And then Jung is involved in this chapter, and part of the purpose of these chapters is getting an idea of what has transpired over time, what our ethics have come to through longstanding and widespread use and consensus. So it might be say, well, why is Jung in there? Because Jung's relatively recent as far as human history goes. And the point of having Jung there is really uh, simply because he has a particular draw and a particular influence on a lot of people who are the modern type of spiritual, but tend to be not Christian or be skeptical towards Christian things. And so one of the goals is to show how what I'm talking about as these underlying foundational issues are underlying Jung's thought as well. That there are these sort of unspoken metaphysical assumptions and agreements that we all have, whether it's traditional Christianity or Jungian theory. Uh, these are things that are common, and so Jung is not he's not quite a foil in the chapter, but he is a way of discussing his ideas is a way of introducing and more directly highlighting the point of the chapter, which is the incarnation, the ideas, the deep Christian ideas of what the divinization of human nature. So that's sort of a brief overview, and we just get into some of the more particular points of Christian thought.
So Jung is kind of a figure that's able to bridge that gap because not a lot of psychologists or psychoanalysts were really making that connection into the metaphysical. Uh, I think he revitalized that, and you make a point in the chapter specifically with his interest in dreams and revitalizing that. Is that something that you kind of wanted to touch base with now? I know that that was a little later in the chapter, but it does revolve around Jung. Did you want to kind of touch on that now before we get into some of the other stuff?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, that's one of the big things that Jung did is develop a much more robust dream theory. Dreams had been introduced into the psychological realm through Freud, and I think they had a common teacher before that. I forget his name, but most popularized by Freud. And then Jung learned from Freud, and they famously split ways over the interpretation and the significance and the depth that they each saw in dreams, and they had very strong disagreements. And Jung was his view of dreams was much more dynamic, much more artistic, you might even say. Uh, the realm for him was uh, a separate living realm, really, and it was connected to our minds in a mysterious way, and we did well to pay attention to it under his model. So what that did was really, if you just wanted to boil it down and put it in some plain language, you could just say he brought us back to the idea that dreams are significant. And this, in a way, fully or I'm not saying that Jung particularly thought this way, but you could take that and you just say, well, so the idea is not only is there purpose in your waking life, but there's actually purpose and meaning in your dreams as well. So it's like really going to the bottom and saying that the saturation of meaning and purpose goes all the way down and is complete. So um so I think just for that, just for the revitalization of dreams and bringing that back into the modern world, it's worth noting and appreciating Jung's work.
And dreams have been fairly important with God speaking to his prophets or to his people through dreams. Joseph was one of the he was the first, right, in the book of Genesis to really um, get kind of some precognition of certain events to come through God in his dreams, such as the famine that was going to be hitting Egypt. Um, and I think there's kind of that there's the camp that doesn't find relevance in dreams. And then I think there are two camps within those that do find relevance in dreams. One is that it is kind of the way that God speaks to you, and then the other is that it's you're in a place of vulnerability, or at least um, you're able to kind of bypass the consciousness, the typical way of thinking, the intellect, and kind of unlock things within the subconscious that are able to kind of work their way up in to the surface via the dreams. And then I guess there are a lot of people too that believe that you could become aware in dreams and interact and have full control over over the dream world as well. Um, did Jung talk about any of that specifically?
Jung wrote a lot of things, and I haven't read all of them. I don't think he spent a lot of time describing uh, lucid dreaming, but I think if you read some of his own personal dream stuff, like that he's included in the Red Book, it seems fairly evident that he there's some lucidity that he has while he's dreaming. Uh, so yeah, I and then this is a whole another realm of considerations and pitfalls and uh, what might you say, divine prohibitions or divine interventions or whatever it is. So it gets we can spend some time on it if you want, but
Yeah, I guess it's somewhat, it was just kind of a wanted to touch on that just a little bit to see maybe what the role, because I know that Jung is also known for symbology and finding meaning within symbols and how those kind of stay relevant throughout generations. Something else that Jung talks about as well are the archetypes. And I know that Joseph Campbell also talked about the hero's journey. And I believe that in this chapter I believe you refer to the hero's journey as well, but that
mhm.
also ties in with the archetype of the hero. Um, could you maybe touch on how that on what that is and then how it's relevant to Christianity?
Yeah, so through a more or less Jungian lens, the hero archetype is the the human archetype, you might say. At least that was Jung's contention in some ways against Freud. Freud believed that humanity was the failed hero. Jung believed that humans were the hero with the potential to fail, but also the potential to succeed. So the the hero archetype in itself, what is it, is a difficult question because for Jung, an archetype is a uh, a living thing that is external to us. So it has its own reality, and we sort of participate in it to some degree, but it's not a static object. It's not a geometrical shape. So you might say it's a process, maybe. So just quickly, there are plenty of people who are super into Jung, and nowhere in this, I have a disclaimer like this in the chapter as well, but nowhere in this chapter or in this video am I claiming to say, this is exactly what Jung believed, and this is a complete overview of his views. Many people would be much more precise sources on that. Anyhow, the so what the archetype is sort of best accessible for what it means for us, and what it means that we participate in the hero archetype is that we have the capacity to embody this energy, you might say, this pattern, this story, and that is a large and what would you say, a large and powerful determining force that is shaping our lives and the world. That is to say, I think if you really push it, what that comes to is that the world is actually, under this theory, set up to be the arena of a hero's journey. It's not when you really get a full orb view of what Jung is talking about with the unconscious, what he means by archetypes. I think that what you come to is the idea that it's not that we're material beings and we have this weird mind thing, and there's some unconscious stuff that is kind of weird but seems patterned, and we sort of share it, and we can get some good stories out of it, and that can like motivate us or something. It's quite the inverse. It's that there is this living realm. I'm going to draw on Platonic ideas, and some people might object to that with Jung or might not. But like there's this realm of forms, there's this realm of ideas, there's this realm of energies, and they are the determining forces for the large part of this world. It's not. We're back to the intro to the book where we have this habitual view of we are material things and our consciousness is this insignificant epiphenomena, but it's the reverse. It's that consciousness is superordinate and determinate, and it has just enormous depths, and has it has an overarching pattern. It also has sub patterns that are active, and they interact in patterns. And so there's this whole world of consciousness, and that is more real and um, more powerful, more like essentially has the reins of designing this world, is the genesis of this world, you might say. And so from that point of view, again, it's foreign to us. It's hard to express and it's hard to really comprehend. But from that point of view, if you then tack on the claim that the archetypal hero is sort of the reigning archetype, the one that determines uh, how things ultimately go and is connected to humanity, then you have a much different story of the world that you're in. It's that you are called and put into a story, and then you have the potential to live that story in a host of different ways. But one of the ways, and really the best way to live it, is through your own version of the hero's journey.
Yeah, the common theme throughout this book is that there is, of course, meaning and there's purpose and uh there is something beyond yourself, despite what our modern times is kind of pushed in our faces through nihilism and atheism. It seems like that's kind of the trend, and that limiting belief system inhibits you, prevents you from reaching your, I guess, to self-actualize or to live in an authentic way. And I think that Jung is an excellent, at least from what I'm understanding, Jung is an excellent bridge to get people that aren't necessarily keen on more of the dogmatic approach or in your face, this is the clean cut, this is the only way. He kind of provides that information that your life has meaning, that you are the hero of your journey, there is purpose. You specifically put in here as well, if I may read this real quick. But Jung believed that against these impossible odds there was hope, and more so that this state of discord and disadvantage was merely the proper and appropriate place for the dynamic soul which is built for and driven by dynamic challenge. Our souls are adventurous, and thus our broken lives are their perfect playgrounds. So we would look at hardships, we would look at the difficult situations and play the victim and think, well, why me? Why does this bad stuff always happen to me? Why is the world in the state that it's in? And, I guess the liberating outlook on life is, well, what are you going to do about that?
Mhm.
You are the hero of your journey. You are on a specific path. Perhaps you've gone through the trials and tribulations that you have in life to help build you up into the person needed for a specific something. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And um, what was that other quote? It was you were built for a time such as these. Is
Yep.
that was something that you had mentioned in the past? What is that from? Do you remember?
That's from the story of, oh, I forget her name. She's a female prophetess in the Old Testament when they're in Babylon. And uh, yeah, she has a vision where she's sort of despairing, and the message is, well, perhaps, like, yeah, the times are bad, but perhaps you were born for times such as this. Yeah, I can't remember her name now, but
And I think that ties into it. And those that uphold kind of a nihilistic mindset, no meaning mentality. Um, I think that there may or may not be, but one of the reasonings behind uh, spreading this information is to handicap people's potential fully. I personally believe that, because if you can keep people in that kind of a mindset of, well, there is no meaning, this entire existence is materialistic, there's nothing greater than myself, I'm not here for anything special, I'm just going to drink Diet Coke and eat cheeseburgers until I die, and I'll call it a good life. I think that's to be expected. But of course, through the age that we are in, and how widespread technology is, a lot of these misconceptions kind of come to the surface and fade away. And I think that, somebody like you, like Jung, might not have been as known. But even in recent years, his kind of popularity has been rising because I think that more and more people are resonating with his message, not necessarily because it is a dogmatic belief, because it's not, but it's kind of that gateway into meaning and purpose. And okay, there is a hero's journey, that maybe there is a reason why I am here right now. That kind of allows people to greatly to or to a better chance of holding on and bringing in these beliefs into their lives. Something else that you talk about is, and I believe we can tie this in with Jung, is um, the efficacy of being a Christian. Being a Christian is to be efficacious. Could you kind of touch on that a little bit?
Well, being a person is to be efficacious. There's no way to get around being efficacious. You're going to have effects in the world. Now, you can be more efficacious by not being at odds with yourself in that sense. But the the Christian view, and this is where I'm tying it, Christianity and Jung and looking at Jung's ideas. Um, the Christian view and the Jungian view are both based on this reality that, I mean, recognizes the reality that we are flawed, um, we are ignorant and limited, and yet we have effects in the world. And so at least some of those effects are detrimental. So we have sinned. That'd be one way to say it. Or Young would say, we have a shadow. We have all this baggage that's built up, stuff we're not aware about, stuff we don't want to be aware about. And the question then is, like, we are efficacious, we are screwing things up, we do have this baggage. And then the question is, what do we do about it? And then just we'll come right back to that. But this ties into the nihilist position. And this is why I think fundamentally that the nihilist position doesn't work, aside from it just not being true. But like we talked about, if meaningless really was real, then meaninglessness would be nirvana because nothing would matter, and then nothing matters, so you're good. The problem is that we still notice problems. And when you think nothing means anything, but problems are still bothering you, whether it's problems with yourself, with your relationship, with the world, you're uncomfortable and bothered. And so then you're in this place of the world sucks, but it has no meaning. And so it's just annoyingly pointless and annoying. The problem because a problem is inherently purposeful. Like any problem is a potential purpose if you look at it from a positive view in that sense. But even when it's negative and it's bothering you, it's only bothering you because you have a sense that it should be otherwise. You have a sense that this is violating justice, order, proper purpose in form. And so we can sort of more easily duck out of, and Jordan Peterson has said this plenty of times, so we can more easily duck out of the positive purposes, like the challenges for us to go out and develop and grow and that stuff, but we can't really duck out of noticing the things that we don't like and that bother us and cause us pain. But those are all just as purposeful as well. So, so that brings us, that's really about this position where we find ourselves beset by problems and issues and some that we've caused and that we're at fault for. And then you have the basic problem of I am a being and I'm experiencing my life as a story, And there are these impediments. There are things outside that are seem to be coming against me or that I feel are coming against me. And then there are things about me that get in my way. And so you're met just like your archetypal position, you might say. The archetypal position of any person is I am on a journey and there's something in the way. There's a challenge before me. And so then the question is, what do we do about that? And Jung's answer, part of Jung's answer, and I think the beginning of an answer for him is to start to become aware of the shadow and start to deal with the shadow, start to deal with the baggage you have. Um, and I think that if you have a honest look at the world and yourself and the completeness of meaning, you cannot bear the true depths of the shadow, of the darkness of the world and the darkness in yourself. You literally, it's impossible to become aware of the shadow if you don't have a faith in infinite redemption and an infinitely loving God, because you will you might be able to handle some things, but you're not going to be able to handle the depths of sin. You're not going to be able to handle the depths of evil and the fact that you're participating in it and connected to it. So then without the Christian view, straightforwardly, without a Christian worldview, you might be able to do some limited shadow work, but you're not going to be able to get through, I wouldn't say all of it, but as as much as is your destiny to get through. So there, I think I don't think it's a question whether Young realized the depths of the shadow or not. And so if I think if you respect Young and you believe that he saw the depths of the shadow and he still prescribed a hopeful path for humans, then he had to have been basing that on an assumption of infinite redemption. And I don't think there's another way to get around it.
Yeah, that's kind of I think if you do kind of go into that shadow work and start delving into maybe some of the aspects of yourself or become aware of some of the aspects of the world that are not pleasing, that would be considered an obstacle in one's way, typically because you wouldn't then have the knowledge to do anything about it if you were not privy to the knowledge. I think that in that form, you just have ignorance, and ignorance is bliss, as the saying goes. But it's not really because uh, although it might feel good to have those bumpers on and those training wheels on, I think that in order to really enact change in the world, you have to see or within yourself, for that matter, you have to understand what the problem is. And in order to understand what the problem is, you have to be subjected to it to some extent, to some way. And then also, which is where Christianity comes in, is you have to apply forgiveness. Um, and you have to be able to digest those different aspects with grace and with love, rather than opposition and fighting and kind of a dualistic. Well, this isn't that's not me. That's not how uh,
Right.
and run away from the problems. So I think this would be kind of a good opportunity to talk about the difference between guilt and shame, and kind of maybe is one I mean, neither people don't like to experience either, but is one maybe a little more constructive than the other?
Yeah. So for most people, I've heard it said either way, but the principle is still the same. The most I've heard it said is that guilt is the feeling bad for having done something bad, feeling bad about your actions, and shame is feeling bad about yourself, about thinking that you are bad. And then the issue there is that when if you actually believe that you are bad, then you believe that there isn't hope. You're usually, well, I'm bad, so I'm going to do bad things, and that's kind of all there is for it. Um, so the idea of shame, again, this is a particular use. We're making a distinction for the purpose of uh, showing a principle. The idea of shame, of being ashamed of your own nature, and a lot of modern people attach to this idea, but this is right in line with Christian theology. According to Christian theology, everything by nature is good. God made everything and God made everything good. So your nature is good. So if you are feeling that your nature is bad, then that's a trap. That's not true for one thing. But it can well, let's say it this way, it's a faith. It's a metaphysics. It's a basic story of how you're going to interpret everything else. If you get into your basic story about how you look at yourself and how you look at your actions, I'm just a bad person. That in this case we're calling shame, and shame is a bad faith. It's going to lead you wrong. Whereas an entirely acceptable point of view from within the Christian tradition, as well as in most of modern psychology, though it's starting to go off the rails like most other things. Um, an entirely acceptable point of view is I did some bad things. As long as you keep it in the realm of I made bad choices, I did bad things. You can even say, go as far as I am capable of doing bad things. That's all true, obviously so. And when you truly feel that and you look at and you say that actually was bad and I am actually responsible for it, then you feel bad. And the reason we would say would be because you don't want to do that again. You're punishing yourself in a way to try and keep yourself off that road. Now you can debate on whether that's the most effective way to avoid those mistakes or not, but as long as you still hold the idea of infinite redemption, that you are fundamentally a good being and that there is hope for you to change, then it's not a eternal problem. It's not a cosmic problem. It's just I've I'm a dark, sinful being. Like I don't know how we got here, but this is where we are. But thank God, God is good and there's infinite redemption.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I think that guilt does have the ability to be constructive in that you are learning or you are accepting the fact that you acted in a poor behavior, that you are not poor, you're not bad, but the action that was done or whatever, something was said, something was done, does not align with who you are. And so there's guilt, so there's that kind of I guess, tension or friction between you and then the action that you did. And so you have then kind of a crossroads. You can accept the fact that this occurred, learn from it, and that ties into the fallible nature of humanity and causality, as well as you perform an input and you get a specific output, and then you readjust according to that output. So if I touch a hot stove, I realize it's hot. Okay, now I'm not going to touch it again because I learned that it's hot. So if I committed a sin, I did something, Um, I learned that it was bad. Now I'm not going to do it again. And so that's where the redemption comes in. That's where the grace comes in. Rather than donning that action on and saying, "Okay, I did this action that I did, this poor action, that's actually who I am." And that then perpetuates worse action in the future because now you've dawned on that persona, that shameful, okay, this is what I am now, and there's no redemption, there's no hope. But you touched on this earlier. If let's say you are one that upholds a nihilist belief or a belief of meaninglessness, but then you are also full of shame for some action that you did. You are attributing meaning to that action, but it is not the one that you want. You're attributing shame. So, but that you're nonetheless giving meaning to it. Um, and so I think that that is one aspect of Christianity that is the real saving grace for a lot of people is that, we are imperfect beings. We are infinite beings having a finite experience. And so a lot of times it's hard to come into terms or to grasp how easy it is to actually be fallible. The hard part is being able to forgive yourself so that you can continue on that purpose before, because if not, you're just holding on to the baggage of the past, or you're worried about something in the future, and you're not in that present moment. You're not living in full authenticity. You're not moving towards self-actualization because you're being burdened uh by what has been. No, you're being burdened by the past and the potential future that could be. So I think that's could you actually
Let's touch on those ideas of self-actualization and authenticity because those are like very much modern psychology buzzwords, and they, you could have the reaction of like, oh, whatever, that's just optimistic secular nonsense or whatever it is. But this comes back to the idea with Jung, where Jung's really popular and people are like, ooh, like he's like the key to spirituality without religion or without Christianity. So a lot of people think. Um, and I think there's a similar thing going on with these ideas where you're actually dependent on a Christian metaphysics in order to get Jungianism to work. Same thing with self-actualization and authenticity, because a lot of times today you'll hear people talk about authenticity, and maybe to a less degree nowadays, but some degree, self-actualization is portrayed as like you do whatever, like you're be authentic to yourself, and yourself is could be anything. Like it just infinite expanse of what yourself could be, and you need to find that, and then whatever it is, be it. And this is very similar to the there's no meaning there, multiple truths. There is no truth. It's really all in the same vein. But the issue is just like you were saying, we run into this perception, this tension that there are things that are out of line with who we are. And people will sort of brush that aside by, well, that's just super ego stuff. That's just culturally, what would they say? Culturally created. I'm blanking on the word now, but like the culture has burdened us with those sort of morals, but they're not really our morals. Well, I mean, that really doesn't address the point, because even if you believe that we're all culturally created, but then why is yourself a particular thing out there to go find if everything's just culturally created? I mean, you can paint this image of the only real thing to battle is all these falsely imposed restrictions, and then true authenticity is just breaking out and defying all those things and doing whatever it is you feel like. But I think the reason why the phrase authenticity and the phrase self-actualization works and spreads and appeals to people is because there is this sense that is a true sense that there is a form, that there is a pattern out there that is something you would like to be in line with. That it's not just a sea of infinite chaotic patterns and one's as good as another, and for some unexplained reason, one particularly fits you. Um, Even if that was the case, again, you'd have to ask, why is there one that fits you? That means there's a purpose. That means there's a destiny, and that would reflect on different scales as well. So, but anyhow, I think it is the reality that there is well, if we're using that language, there is a self, there is a you, the ideal you, whatever it is, that calls to you and that you should want to be authentic towards. Then the disagreement between Christianity and sort of the modern view would be that, and I think Christianity is right, is that there is much more of uh, a fractal set of patterns that self is part of. So it's not just like the artist's fantasy of I've got infinite money and I do whatever I want and I spin paint around in a white room and everyone comes and claps. Like it's not just the fulfillment of your creative desires. There's a just like there's a self that you want to actualize towards, that self exists within a stream, and that stream is going in a particular direction. So there's more parameters and more bounds on what that ideal self should look like than we like to think in the modern era, where we like to think that nihilism is great and there's no meaning to anything and demons don't exist and that sort of stuff. But the reality is there is a pattern and a goodness, a good order out there, and a pattern to goodness. And so, insofar as we are good and our ideal self is good, it is going to partake of that pattern in some way. It can still be infinitely differentiated, and the what you might say the river or the way the tree that is this collection of those selves is wide and varied and whatnot. So it's not like it's actually limiting per se. It's only limiting in the sense that it goes towards the good and not towards what is evil. But uh, that is actually the opposite of limiting. But anyhow, um, so these phrases of self-actualization and of authenticity, that has the underlying assumption, and that's why those phrases are appealing, that there is this proper destiny, there is this proper path, there is this fitting way that you are called to be, and that you should adjust your life to get more towards that. And people they resonate with that and they're sold on it, often within the bounds of the chaotic meaninglessness modern atmosphere. But even so, they're still reflecting this idea that there is an ideal to be moved towards, and there is purpose, and there is meaning, and there is goodness and integrity. And I think as the more authentic you are about that, the more you realize that those are realities. That means they don't just play out in your particular life and then are just truncated and non-existent all around that. That there's again, a fractal pattern where integrity and goodness organized on larger scales.
Yeah, and I think that ties in with the shame and guilt because we have at least what we can conceive as being free will. And with that comes a fallible nature. We are testing things, we are trying things, but as long as we have that, I guess that north light, that guiding star, uh, you know, the spirit, the Holy Spirit, to kind of guide us on that direction towards living a purposeful life. Um, I think that's then you all of those feelings of guilt and shame and everything will naturally start to fall away because then you're less likely to engage or partake in certain activities that would bring on those feelings. Because then you have you have that like you said, you've kind of tapped into that alignment, that pathway, that journey, that road to that. Um, Something that comes to mind, and we were just talking about the term self-actualization and the term authenticity, and how those terms have been misconstrued and I think misinterpreted, where somebody that thinks that they're a cat and needs a litter box for the bathroom might say, well, I'm living my authentic self right now, and I'm
Yeah.
self-actualized. What would you say? What would you say to that? Would you, I mean, in terms of differentiating people that might live in clown world and believe that they're fully authentic, as opposed to what we're talking about and living an authentic and self-actualized life?
Well, um, I hope that I just answered that with the fact that uh, there's not only goodness in your life, the goodness scales up, and so there's a larger pattern of goodness. But then also the book is the answer to that is there's purpose in form. So the idea that I'm living my authentic life as a cat is belied by the fact that I am in fact a human. And there's a reason that I'm a human. Like I am purposely put in the position of being this human in this body in this story. So to say I'm going to go authentically be a cat is as nonsensical as we should take that. We don't take it as nonsensical as it should be, but it is exactly as nonsensical as it if if that happened, put it this way, if that happened in the 1980s, like have the reaction that someone in the 1980s would have had to that, and that is the proper amount of nonsensical, or even push it back further, the 1880s. Like someone says, I'm a cat, give me a litter box. They're like, drag this person off to the asylum. Like, this is nonsense. So, yeah, I mean, the reality is that there is purpose in form. And we'll continue to build on this and demonstrate it, but the the belief or the action pattern that denies your the patterned reality that is you in a form would not be authentic to reality because reality is your purposed form that's here. Um, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that makes sense. It's I guess it would just be easy to misconstrue those points just for the layman, for somebody that doesn't really, that hears the term self-actualization and authenticity, and then believes that, okay, well, this is what I am. I saw, my friends are doing it, so therefore I'm going to do it, even though it might completely contradict what it is that we're talking about in terms of correlating the that self-actualization and authenticity to being true to the form that you're in, to acting out in what it means to be this human being, and interacting in this world accordingly,
Right.
in specific parameters, within those specific parameters.
Right. Right. So let's put it this way. So if someone was a fan of Jungian psychology, and they may well be within this realm where they're like, what's this guy talking about Christianity being, fundamentally Young? Young was a Gnostic and all this stuff. True to varying degrees, but this I would it would be a rare person who was following Jungian thought and who concluded that, well, my authentic self is a liar. Like who I'm just a person who should lie about stuff. Or my self archetype conforms to the image of a a urchin, like a street urchin. Like I'm just the lowest of the low and I should go wallow in garbage and hope people kick me on the way by. The natural, obvious psychological approach to that would be like, no, you are being manipulated by like outside forces and weird complexes to feel like you should act in this way. But that doesn't just because you feel like this is somehow rewarding or this is somehow your true self. I wouldn't be surprised in this day and age, but it would be vanishingly small people who would be like, "Oh yeah, I'm right on board with that. That's your true self. Go be a liar. Yeah, that's right on." Or just uh, go debase yourself in front of as many people as possible because that's your true self. There's this, it's an assumption. It's a metaphysical, um, story that we have. It's a presupposed schema where it's like, no, we are not liars. That's not something that our true self can overlap with and be, because our true self is not commensurate with a liar. So that is one of the parameters that exists and obviously exists around what is your true self, what you can and should actualize towards, you might say. Um, and so everybody really has these intuitions and these assumptions. And even in the modern era, when there's all this nonsense going on, you really can't totally get rid of them because they're there and they're obvious. So in a sort of structured formula where someone has a complex against religion and uh, they have some affinities towards the modern, uh, whatever, modern expressive proclivities, then they'd be like, no, 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 that's not true. You can be yourself in any way, but put them in just the natural position in a counseling session, whatever it is, and they're not going to be like, "Oh, my true self's a liar." Like they know that's not true. How do they know that's not true? Because there are determining factors to the reality of the true self, which again is not whatever I make it up to be. It's something out there that is living and I don't have, I participate in, but I don't control.
Yeah, it's like, I guess when you think of, I guess to make an analogy for okay, so let's say somebody wants to lose 200 pounds, okay, and living in a slimmer body would would be more of an actualization for them. Reaching that, would be self-actualization to an extent, I guess, in a material sense,
Mhm.
they're not going to achieve that by continuing the same habits that they've been doing to get 200 pounds overweight. And so they might have the conception in their minds of or visualization in their mind of attaining that outcome but the actions they're currently undertaking is not in alignment with that outcome. It would be the same as okay, well, if you're acting like a cat or you're a liar, these actions, this way of life is not in alignment with that level of actualization. So what is it then that you do to get back on course? Well, you have to start acting like that actualized version right now. And that means that you don't engage in the behaviors that keep you there. So if you say, well, my goal is to be 200 pounds and or to lose 200 pounds and you're saying that in between mouthfuls of a cheeseburger, you're not doing that. And I think that a lot of people don't understand the necessity of process and the necessity of time that it takes to to achieve these things or to get there. It's like, well, if you want to be a better version of yourself, you want to start following that right path. Well, that means that you have to be a moral, virtuous, forgiving, compassionate individual. But if you're a liar, a cheater, a thief, a degenerate, doing all these crazy things, that's not in alignment. Therefore, you're not attaining those things. And I think that's across the board. I mean, because people that might uphold a nihilistic mentality are more likely to be depressed. And so if they're depressed, they're most likely engaging in behaviors that continues to uh, accentuate that depression. They might be in bed all the time, eat junk food. They might be full of shame, of guilt. So the first step actually might be, well, you need to go drink some water and go outside and put your feet in the grass and maybe listen to a good song. And so, I don't think that people take into account the minuscule baby steps that can be undertaken to slowly start shifting the momentum in the other direction. And fully, I think that's the bottom line. And that is something that your book does, because what your book does is it shows the intertwined connection between the infinite and the finite, in that it's saturating. You can't have the finite without the infinite. And so therefore the finite is an aspect of the infinite, just like the infinite is an aspect of the finite. It's all intertwined. And so people have a strong difficulty to accept, or I guess a strong aversion to believe in something like this and then to take on the necessary undertaking. That is what I think Christianity does so well, is it gives you Christ. It gives you kind of that forerunner, that individual that says, hey, you know what? I'm going to show you that a 4 minute mile is possible. And not only that, but I expect you to run a 3 minute and 59 second mile after me. And so that kind of opens up that gate of either self limitations or external limitations to hold you down, because now you have that example. And that's what a true leader is, right? A true leader leads by example. They show the way. And that's what Christ did. So I think that's a really big aspect of this, is starting to take small shifts or big shifts, but start aligning yourself with that direction of fulfilling that purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, I mean, you really have to have the Christian metaphysics. You have to have Christ because even if you break away from sort of the materialist, nihilist stuff, and then you have this vision of here's infinite life and here I am, and somehow infinity's right here, but I'm still me and I have all these problems, then there's sort of this the gap between you and your ideal self or whatever it is just immeasurable. And the idea that like, well, I'm going to make one small change today and that's going to be worth it. Like to think about that in the presence of the immediate infinity is just like, well, I'm never going to get there. Like, what are you talking about? So even even in a spiritual view and in a view that's alive to the infinite, you have to have a mediator between the infinite and the finite, and you have to have the idea that the infinite isn't just good and perfect and um, present, but it also has to be intimately familiar with your limitations and your challenges and how much you're tempted and what it feels like um, to be living this life and to go through this stuff and to have seen failure and to have seen uh, people giving up and all that sort of stuff. So just the idea of finite existing uh, coexisting with the infinite alone could be horrifying. It's only the idea that the infinite is loving towards the finite, the infinite intends the finite, the infinite has a particular life for you to live, and you're not going to be, uh, you know, the you're not going to be the savior of the world. You're not the one guy who gets it all right and everything they do is gold and you don't ever have to feel any shame because you never even had a shadow because you just, you know, perfect from the beginning. No, the infinite, God has given you this life to live and knows that part of this life is messing it up, is sinning. Um, there's one of the theologians I like talked about how part of the law, part of the Torah that was given was what to do when you screw up. So you actually couldn't keep the full law unless you screwed up because you had to, it was built in repentance and and offering sacrifices to get back on the right side and repent of your sins was part of what you were supposed to be doing. So in that same sense, like we are we are who we are supposed to be. There's actually not a fundamental metaphysical problem. There's a challenge and there's an uncomfortability and there's a human problem, a problem on this level, but there's not a fundamental problem. Even the fact that you have problems is not a problem. It's known that you have problems. It's known that you're going to fail at them. God knows exactly how weak you are. And that idea only comes through Christianity and only comes through Christ, that God is loving you in spite of your sin, in spite of your failure, in spite of your rejecting of Him. It says in the Bible, God is merciful to those who are uh, unkind and wicked. And I mean, if you're a Christian, then God literally prayed for forgiveness for the people nailing him to the cross. Now, that's the message of God. That's the reality of God that I think you have to have if you are going to live an embodied life, or in Jungian terms, to go through an individuation process where you are going to be a particular person and you're going to have significant effects in the world. And some of those significant effects are going to be bad things that you screw up and you have to deal with. The only way to have hope in such a scenario amidst an infinite world is that that's known and accounted for, and that despite the fact that you're flawed, you're provided for and materially and purposefully. You are given purpose. So I think you really have to have the Christian view in that sense.
Yeah, I think of, what you just said there of Christ praying for his enemies as they were crucifying him. He said, "Forgive them, for they do not know what they do." Uh, I think of I think of the shadow work too, in that, there are certain activities, certain ways of living that are expansive, and certain ways that are living that are constrictive. And if we are full of shame, if we're full of guilt, if we haven't gone through that work to identify aspects of ourselves that maybe we don't like, and that we want to change, then we're constrictive. Those people that act out in emotional, violent natures, in in uh, in ways that don't align with the good of humanity. That is because of and what I believe is that it's because they're in pain. They're going through, they're not vulnerable. They haven't done a lot of the work within themselves, as opposed to somebody that has identified those things within them, has provided forgiveness for themselves, has that connection with the infinite, and knows that it is good, uh and lives in alignment and accordance with that. Then you're living in expansion and compassion, and you're wanting to help fellow humans achieve the same thing. That brings up a quote that you have here. You say, "It is the conscious infinite connection to the finite which allows for us to be at peace with our fallible nature and the muddled path we have taken and will continue to take. And it is the infinite, through the consciousness that we are all necessarily interconnected and dependent, which assures justice and calls for compassion in the midst of this infinite freedom." And then you quote Matthew chapter 25, verse 40, "Inasmuch as ye have done unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." And so I think that's really important, because an aspect of doing that work is to apply compassion to others, to be an upstanding, moral, virtuous, integrous, good person. And it seems that those that are acting against that, more, and I'm not saying that all competition is bad, but in more cutthroat, uh I guess nefarious competition, that's all constrictive, and stems from uh an unattended to vulnerability within that individual, regardless of it being displayed as potential power or toxicity. A lot of it is just stemmed through a lack of forgiveness and repentance within oneself. And you touch on kind of, you specifically talk about the incarnation, and how big of a deal it is that the infinite came down in finite form, had a finite experience, uh, and was among us and taught us, and
Hmm.
how much of a selfless, what kind of an act that was. But regardless of that, the turmoil that this world was in and is in did not accept that level of good. It
Hmm.
pushed it out. So how can we act, those that have identified the purpose and the meaning, and walk along the narrow path, or at least attempt to, regardless of the fallible nature that we have, and ask for forgiveness? How can we help others achieve that as well?
The quote that came to mind when you said that was, "It is not in man that walketh to directeth his steps." So, how can we walk again? It sort of goes back to the idea of how could we live out a hero's journey? Well, only if the world were set up in such a way that it allowed us to. And same thing with how can we walk out this path? Only if God has made the provisions for us to do so, and is helping us along the way. So that's part of an answer. How can we help others? I sort of a similar answer on the same valence. There's a quote I like from Rainer Maria Rilke, who I believe the quote's on the homepage of my website, and it says something like, "It takes an entire constellation of events for one person to help another." So, like, it's not it's not that I say, there's a person, I'm going to go help them, and I can just construct the perfect magical spell that just unlocks their heart and boom, they're, a transformed human being. It has to be that God has brought us together. It has to be, I'm a, I've done a good amount of studying, but I have a particular way of expressing things. I have a particular way I'm thinking about things. I have particular things I'm reading at a certain time. And me expressing that, if I just went around like a scientific experiment and just said what I was thinking to as many people as possible, 99% of them would be like, I don't get it. Or so what? Or, it's really only the person who, for, however many years or decades, their past experience has, you know, tweaked them to this sort of perspective and made these words, particularly salient for them. And then when we miraculously come together at the right time and I say something and they're like, whoa, that puts together something I hadn't, solves a problem for me that I couldn't solve on my own, or highlights something I hadn't thought of in that way. Like the fact that I said the thing is not the main operative uh, ingredient. The main ingredient is the fact that God has a plan and he brought these two together that have similar uh that are whatever that are vibing that are that have similar uh perspectives and reactions to things, and then when something is shared it has that the effect that can be appreciated. So from both those answers, I mean, it really is on God. It really is on the fact that the world is set up in such a way that we are able to participate in our own hero's journey and in the aid of others. But given that the world is set up in that way, then I think, then it's just a question of learning. You might call them social skills, learning what works and what doesn't, and trying to help people as much as you can, and just throwing out uh a lot of seeds, a lot of lines, and getting hits on some of them. So I mean, I really think it is a God thing in the end of the day, but we are definitely supposed to do what we can. So once you're in that room with that person, and you never know who it's going to be, so sort of always try it out. Then you have to speak up, and you have to go out on a limb and offer a hand, and hopefully the person takes it, and hopefully they take it in the right way.
That's wild, and that's usually how it works with it being all in God's hands, in that, you might be able to give somebody the cherry on top of whatever it is that they're looking for, but that
Right.
takes two things. One, it takes them to have something for the cherry to be put on.
Hmm.
The other thing is you have to be in a specific position to have the cherry to put on top of it. And both of those can take a long time, a lot of buildup in the past to get there. And then when the action happens of you putting the cherry on top of somebody's Sunday or whatever, a lot of that usually doesn't click until after the fact. Then you start thinking like, oh, wait a minute, you know what? That thing that I learned 5 years ago that I just happened to have paid attention to and listened to, that I completely disregarded, was actually useful in this moment to help somebody out, and a lot of that too isn't in the, you're not thinking, oh, I'm so glad I learned this 5 years ago as I'm helping this person. Most of it's just kind of, it just happens. And
Right.
that's typically how God works through us, right? It's just like we're not, oh, well, right now God's working through me. Here we
Right.
go.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just like
I,
it just blah, it happens, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, was that what I? Was that what I think it was? I don't know. So it's that's exactly it. And I guess then the action would be if we're saying, okay, well, what can people do to help others? It is to live a moral life, to live a virtuous life, to do what you can to not engage in sin, to be integrous. By doing these things and upholding these things, then that puts you in a better position to be used by God with
Right,
whatever it
right.
is He needs you to do. In order to be that vessel, that arbiter into this world, I think of it like this. If we think of those like lab, if you look at a lab and they have like those big boxes and then they have like the gloves that you stick your hands in
Hmm.
and interact, it's like, the God would be the hands and we are then the glove, and then
Hmm.
whatever is being interacted on is the world. But if there's a bunch of crap and stuff in the gloves, the hands won't fit in properly to properly interact in the world. And so in order to do that, you have to live with these virtues and you have to be able to walk that hero's journey, that path to have the meaning and the purpose to be fully usable in this world.
Yeah. Yeah. That just made me think of kind of the first part of what you're talking about. The kingdom of God does not come with observation. That's one of the things that Christ says. And they won't say, "Oh, look, here it is," or "Oh, look, there it is, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you." So it's not about, you know, oh, I've designed, I've learned exactly the right things, and now I'm going to go into the room with the people that I know that I'm going to be in the right room with, and I'm going to make it happen. It's not, you're not planning it. You do the goodness that is within you to do, and then that harmonizes with the goodness going on in the universe, and you become part of the chorus of angels, the infinite chorus of goodness ringing through all of creation.
That's exactly it. And so I think of two, you know, it's those experiences, those feelings that kind of open that up. I forget who it was. Was it Richard Dawkins that had kind of that spectrum of emotions and shame,
No,
guilt.
David
David,
R.
David,
Hawkins.
I'm sorry, Richard Hawkins. David R. Hawkins. That's completely
Yeah.
opposite. That's literally, yeah. So David R. Hawkins, I knew it was Hawkins. Um, he had a that chart, and at the bottom was shame, fear, guilt, all of those constrictive emotions, and then at the top was bliss, happiness, love, joy, acceptance is in the middle, and there's some other ones, but that work, that feeling, that expression comes with the belief, the knowing of meaning and purpose. And it's not necessarily through interacting with the mind, like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna do this now, and I'm saying these words to myself, and I'm doing these things. It's more about being and experiencing that really brings that to light. It's like you can't say, okay, I need to experience joy right now, so experience joy. It's more of engagement in an open with an open heart, without necessarily getting the intellect or getting anything else involved, and just being in that feeling and being in those emotions. I think is the real kind of way to connect with all of this. It's not necessarily willing yourself into a specific position. It's accepting the overarching understanding that there is purpose and that there is form, and then you just kind of naturally resonate with yourself. It's not, a 30-day quick, 30 days to enlightenment, or here's that one. It's kind of that the whole story, and I tie it back to Jung in that, for a lot of people that question, well, why is my life so hard? Why have I gone through all of these hardships? Well, maybe it was because you were supposed to. And maybe by going through all of these things and learning resilience, understanding patience, understanding forgiveness, then then that gives you the ability to lead with that and interact with others through that. Because then you also have the the empathy, to understand that somebody's in, let's say, a precarious situation, and that by seeing them in that situation, knowing that you've also experienced something like that and know what that person is going through, you can then better help them out of that and to see the light. Um, Towards the end of the chapter, you talk about well, the last section of the chapter is called "The Problems with Absolute Purpose and Their Solution." What is absolute purpose?
Well, absolute purpose is the reality of life, is that there's infinite purpose, and things are absolutely purposeful. The issue is that we're humans and we are limited in our knowledge. So, um, many people know people who, or are the kind of people who are very annoyed by and skeptical of people who like have a wild common connection and they interpret all sorts of crazy meaning behind it. And while I think what we've gone through in this book so far underpins better that point of view that there is all this overflowing meaning beyond what we normally consider, and it's not the case that things are just meaningless. It does become a problem when people assume that they know the meanings behind things because we don't know the meanings behind things for the most part. Um, and so just to kind of what you were saying there at the end, where you said, why did I go through this? Well, maybe it's because, and I think that maybe is really important because it's just a suggestion. It's like, well, what if you looked at it in this way? And you'll still have plenty of modern cynics who will just say, well, yeah, but what if I don't look at it in that way? It's like, okay, whatever, then don't. But if on the other hand you say, well, you went through that because, you're not saying maybe, you're absolute because, you know, God wanted you to learn X. God wanted you to learn humility, so he put you through that. That way more people are going to be lost on that. And I think rightly so. And that's a relatively mild example. There's the just sort of trivial and annoying examples of like, oh my gosh, uh, I had a dream last night, and then I saw a butterfly flying today, and then now I met you, and you have a butterfly tattoo, and we're supposed to be best friends for life. It's like, you know, maybe those two people go and live happily ever after,
Yeah.
but most people, maybe it's not a virtue, but most of us are just like, okay, yeah. So that's just sort of trivial and annoying, especially annoying to sort of the hyper scientist people who are, have a whole spiel. But then there's the moralizing bit of like, God made you go through that because you whatever. And that I think is the worst bit. And it can get a lot worse where it's like, you know, oh, your child died. Like, oh, well, your child died because you were unfaithful to your wife or because you stopped going to church. It's like, really? That and Jesus directly says this. He points to a tragedy that had happened recently in their memories at that time, and he says, "Do you really think that all the people who died in the collapse of that, whatever it was, that building, they were what, especially more sinful than everyone else around them? Like, no, there's some just chaos and some tragedy that's not." You can't just say, well, that happened because you were sinful in this way or in anyway. Again, it happens with the blind man when the Pharisees come up and they're like, well, who sinned to make this person blind? Was it their parents or was it him? He was born blind, so someone must have sinned. And they sort of, I don't think they're totally just assuming that, they see the problem and the problem that it causes with God, and they're trying to stump him with a very difficult problem because the problem of evil and tragedy in the world is a huge problem that humans do not know how to totally comprehend. And so, but the reality is, the answer is we don't know. And to say, oh, yes, this happened because of your sin, either this particular sin that I know about or just in general, you're sinful, so therefore this happened to you. That's wrong to make that assumption because you don't know and you can't know. And even Jesus says, don't do that. Like that's not the appropriate way to react to these situations. So absolute purpose is a reality. When we internalize absolute purpose, we can become, to use more Jungian terms, we can become inflated and believe that not only is there absolute purpose, but I am perfect at discerning absolute purpose. And that's really where the problem comes in. And so, fortunately, even though absolute purpose causes some pretty big problems and and has been a problem for ages in terms of people believing it and then implying it uh, where they shouldn't. The solution is simple. It's that we're fallible, and we should recognize that we're fallible and that we're limited, and we just simply don't know the absolute purpose behind everything. And there's a lot of things that uh, we're just not going to know the meaning behind, and that's just life.
Yeah, yeah, that brings to mind, there was some I've actually seen this pop up on Twitter a couple of times, in all sincerity, I mean it's posted with in sincerity, or they believe it's really true, but I've heard that people think that those that are balding or that who are bald is because of their sinful nature and degeneracy, and that is what makes them lose their lose their hair,
Yeah.
and so it's I mean it's just complete wackadoo. I mean, think about it too with what is the Salem witch trials. Well, if we put this large like log or stone on them in the lake, if they sink and die, well, then they weren't a witch. But if they
Yeah.
don't, if they live, then they're a witch, and we're gonna have to kill them. So like just and laughing not at the situation, but just at the
Right.
complete bonkers ridiculousness of it, and just that people think that they are the absolute arbiters of truth and justice, and it's not God, it's them. And so
Right. Exactly.
they're going to come up with, well, if this person has a slightly larger left elbow than the right elbow, then that means that they're such and such. And, you could just, well, blue eyes are better than brown. I mean, just the prejudices just are never ending, and people can attribute meaning willy-nilly to all sorts of things that are complete nonsensical things.
Hmm.
So I think that there is a lot of danger in that, and I do believe that we see that in a lot of aspects of real strong dogmatism to some extent, and I think that kind of averts people to kind of going in and taking these things to heart because of that, because either they don't know if they can fit into that preconceived ball of rhetoric in order to be considered normal, or it's just not that appealing, because then you're just under constant scrutiny of certain things. Um, and so that would be kind of the you know, man, I guess, attempting to take on the role of God as judge, jury, and executioner. And like I was saying, attributing meaning to things like Jesus said, it's not that those people died in the tower because they were um really sinful. These things just things just happen and they play out a lot of the times. That's not to say that there are a lot of things that are coordinated and whatnot that are evil and full of bad people, but you can't just necessarily make assumptions on a lot of things because you feel that you are the end all be all when it comes into truth. Yeah.
Right, right. It goes back to the fallibility versus infallibility issue of and just shows the spread of this of like how much of a problem it is to start saying I'm infallible in whatever realm that occurs in. That's an issue, and I think that again is a large impediment to people spreading and accepting religion is they find a lot of people uh, giving off the message either overtly or implied that I've entered this club and now I've become infallible. It's like, it's not how it works.
You're still a fallible,
Yes.
you're a fallible person. And I think that we see that with a lot of individuals that have attained a certain level of what would be deemed as a spiritual awakening of sorts, where people might be privy to certain things or be able to observe certain things that they weren't able to before, and as a result, they kind of look down on others because of that. And once you kind of wake up to some things and or you read the Bible and your eyes are open, your heart is open to certain things. um I think a lot of people do fall prey into that. Well, I know what's right and they clearly don't know anything and they're just flailing around. uh I think
Yeah.
that's a big problem with a lot
Yeah.
of.
Now I'm not a sheep.
Now I'm not yeah, now I'm not a sheep,
Yeah.
Uh
It's
my
actually a interesting point, moving out more country-wise. Our pastor out here has made the point several times of like, there are actually people around who have raised sheep, and it's just something I wouldn't have known before, but sheep are like really dumb. Sheep are just incredibly stupid. Like the you have to walk around and like whack them on the head to get them to stop doing something that's hurting them. And like you can't, there's in the Psalms it says he leadeth me by still waters. You can't lead them by running waters because they'll get in and drown. And
golly.
so like the was one of the funny things about the Hebrew scriptures is like God was not flattering to people. He was like, "You're a sheep and I'm your shepherd. Like you're an idiot and I'm here to help you out." And
Yeah.
like that's the attitude that's reality is like I'm an idiot and I depend on God. And yeah. So
Like, I guess it's like watching, seeing a small 2-year-old think that they know everything, and
yeah.
they're trying to get on the countertop to make themselves a bowl of cereal because they think they're old enough to do it now. It's like, no, 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 come on down, come on down. It's like
Or you let them do it and just watch all the milk go and they drop it and they just watch it and they're oh.
oh, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. Please don't reprimand me. Yeah, that's that's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. That's I guess there's humor in that because we can see how fallible we are, yet observe all the attempts that we try to make to convince ourselves that we're infallible,
Mhm.
regardless of the fact that we consistently act in that way. Um, well, that's incredible. That's incredible, Rob. This has been an excellent chapter. Was there anything else specifically that you wanted to touch on?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Um, I will say though, at the end of the chapter, you have a couple of paragraphs here, kind of stating where we're headed. The next chapter, chapter 11, is called Eastern Enlightenment: Moving Effectively Towards the Transcendent. What are some things that, if you can just kind of give us a little bit of a teaser as to what we're going into here in the next chapter?
Yeah, so in the sort of the similar circle I was talking about earlier with people who are into Jungian thought and spirituality, but not Christianity, there's a lot of talk about purposelessness or um, uh, emptiness and things that would seem to contradict a lot of what we're talking about. And the approach of this section of the book is going to be to look at Christianity and looking at how it overlapped with Jungianism. And now we're going to look at some of the Eastern religions and traditions and see, do they contradict each other? Are they sharing some assumptions or not? I obviously kind of believe they are, and I'm going to make the case that they're sharing foundational assumptions, even though on the surface people tend to use words that can be more interpreted in a nihilistic way or contrary to Christianity way. I think when you look at the actual story that they're telling, when you look at the metaphysics, when you look at how they go about doing things, the effects, the cause and effects they're putting in, that sort of stuff, I think a different story is told. So it's the next part will be starting to look at some of those ideas and some of those religions as sort of as an exploration and sort of taking a new view of them and trying to put things together. But then that's going to lead us to reaffirming a lot of what we've found so far. So
And is I know that Jung was a Gnostic, or is that correct?
debatable.
Debatable, but he also dabbled in some Eastern philosophy as well to kind of get a lot of his to formulate a lot of his opinions and practices. Is that correct? Did he do that as well, or was he primarily involved with?
I think he was mostly influenced by Western traditions. Gnostic variations and alchemy were like really heavy studies on his part. I'm positive he was aware of Eastern spirituality and the ideas going on there, but I don't think his main study and determining uh, influences were Eastern for the most part.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that next chapter. Um, that's yeah. I mean, this has been an incredible talk. Um, well, everybody, please go pick up this book on Amazon. It is called Purpose Informed, the Necessary Basis of All Ethics. We've just gone through chapter 10, Christianity and Jung. If you'd like, go ahead and pick up a copy of this book and then read along with us. And during the next conversation, which is going to be on chapter 11, about Eastern Enlightenment, go ahead and leave a comment below and engage in conversation with us, and we'll go ahead and reply. And you know what? I think that would just help out with everybody if we got some interaction with some of the audience, maybe propose some questions. So please, everybody, check out this book, Purpose and Form, on Amazon. If you go and search in the little search box there, you're going to have to put Purpose and Form along with Rob's name, Robert B. Davis. It's not going to pop up unless you do that, but I will go ahead and add a link in the description below so that you can find it. There will also be a link to Rob's personal website where you're going to be able to find all of his works, learn a little bit more about him, and then possibly get early access or some understanding of maybe some of his future works that are coming out as well. So everybody, I hope that you have a beautiful and blessed day. Thank you, Rob, for coming on, and we're going to keep going. We're over halfway done with the book, and we're going to keep going. And then after this book, there probably will be another one that we're going to be going into. Won't talk a little bit about that maybe a little bit later, but it's going to be a good one as well. So everybody, have a blessed day, and may peace be with you. God bless.